Okay, so you might notice things look a bit different, and that's because I'm on the laptop today. But I wanted to get this recorded because I wanted to talk about this film director, producer, whatever the fuck he is. I must admit, it's probably pretty obvious I'm not a film buff. This Harvey Weinstein guy who has never been on my radar before, to be honest. And the first thing I knew of him was when I saw a picture of him with his wife and thought, if ever there's a real life fucking beauty and beast, that's him and his wife, who apparently has left him now as a result of all these allegations that have been made. And I want to discuss that and just throw it into a bit of a context as to what the fuck is going on. How do things it just boggles my mind a little bit here. And but first let me say that these are the kind of things that I don't tend to talk about very often. But I think that when things like this happen, we need to face up to them. And I'm assuming that all this is genuine, or at least a significant portion of the allegations made against him are genuine. Let's put the rape allegations to one side, perhaps, because they're very specific allegations that consent wasn't given. And that is the kind of thing that maybe it's best to assume innocence until proven guilty, or to suspend our position on those things. But I think, given the bulk, the sheer weight of allegations, and the nature of the people that are making their allegations, it's not that if you're a film star or something that what you say carries more weight generally, but I think it does in certain circumstances. There was a case a couple of years ago in the UK of a bus that crashed, and somebody claimed whiplash, and then within a few weeks there were more claims for whiplash from one single street than there were people that had been sat on that bus. But here you're talking about a street of people without very much money that have a lot to gain and not a lot to lose. When you're talking about the Gwyneth Paltrows and people like that of this world, then they're not looking for a fucking payout from these things, and they have a lot more to lose in terms of their reputation from making shit up and that coming out than they do from anything they're going to gain from making a false accusation. So if you're one of these people that still doesn't want to accept it until it's gone through a court, that's up to you. But it seems to me that Weinstein guy himself has accepted that he'd acted beyond the pale and made some statements to that extent. And given the nature of those people, you know, I would situate my testicles under a very, very large lump hammer. I feel sufficiently sure that there's some substance to all of this, and you know, clearly he's acted in a way that is not commensurate with his position. He was in a position of great authority, and you can understand that. I can understand that the authority that I would wield if I was in his position there as effectively a hire and a firer, a maker or a breaker of careers, and then taking what were women just coming into the industry who would be looking to impress, who'd be looking, maybe that's their one big break, and then putting them into a difficult situation like that with a sexual element. That is a coercive thing to do, and that's totally... This is a workplace environment we're talking about, effectively, even if it's in a hotel out of hours. That's a fucking working relationship, and that, as far as I'm concerned, is an abhorrence. And it's an abhorrence that's taken place over a number of years with regard to him. And I think it's important because I know there will be people out there that almost feel a knee-jerk desire to sort of get a bit apologetic for what's gone on. Why? Because they know that there will be a certain strand of feminist out there, the man-hating strand I'm talking about, not feminists in general, but the man-hating strand that will want to cite this as evidence of just how evil men are, right? And just that this is what men are like, these fucking terrible people. And so obviously, as a man, it's tempting to want to sort of kick back against that. But I don't think that that should lead anybody into trying to defend what is indefensible. And people do indefensible things, and probably men more than women. Men tend to do really these shocking things that happen, tend to be by men more than women, I would have to say. And this is indefensible, and it's gone on for so long, and it's gone on, right? This is the thing for me that really gets me, is that we had a thing in the UK, if you're not familiar with a guy called Jimmy Savile, he was a fucking national hero, right? This was a guy, he was like a DJ, radio DJ, and he became very famous and did a lot of work for charity. And He ran marathons, even in like, I think his 50s and his 60s, he was running marathons for charity, raising money for these kids' charities, getting involved with these great children's hospitals in the UK. And it turns out that all the time he was abusing children and using his position in these hospitals, especially Stoke Mandeville Hospital, to abuse children. And this went on for decades and involved hundreds of victims. And it was only after he died and a couple of things came to the surface that then people heard these claims and said, well, this happened to me and this happened to me and I observed this and I knew about this and this organisation had been told about this, and the full extent of it came out. But in that circumstance, I mean, the question was asked there, how the fuck could this go on for so long and never come to a head? But most of the people that were victimised there were people of very low means, right? They were people who's going to pick what they have to say above what this great Jimmy Savile. So Jimmy Savile, this great fucking man of charity who's done so much for decades for children's charities, who's going to listen to them above Jimmy Savile? This Harvey Weinstein thing, it's a bit of a different situation, isn't it? And this is what, because as much as the Jimmy Savile situation boggled my mind that it had gone on for so long, this doubly boggles my mind for two reasons. One is that a lot of the victims are now the great and the good themselves, right? These are not just normal people. These are people that are fucking big name celebrities in their own right, and so have some status and power and authority to what they say in their own right. And even though there are many of them, and even though this seemed to be known throughout the industry, maybe not to the degree that some people are suggesting, but nevertheless throughout the industry, he had this kind of vibe and aura and understanding, and people were warning people about what he was like. It still didn't come to a head. And the other thing is with Hollywood, you've got a group of people that are overwhelmingly very, very liberal and progressive and seemingly on board with all of this kind of call-out culture, and we can't allow these kinds of, very, very liberal agenda there. And just the kind of people that you would think are the kind of people that wouldn't allow this thing to go on, right? You would have thought there was a sufficient critical mass of those kind of minded people in Hollywood that this would have been brought out to the surface, and yet it hasn't. It's took this fucking long for this to come to the surface, and I find that worrying. People will talk about sort of institutional issues and stuff like that, but it doesn't seem to be the institutions that are really the problem here. It just seems to be the culture, actually. It seems to be the culture because it's individual people and the way individual people get together and deal with things that seems to be the problem. Because that's the level you would have expected it to be dealt with at some extent, wouldn't you? For some of these great and good people to speak to other great and good people and say, well, I've had this experience, you've had this experience, that's several of us. What are we going to fucking do about it? And if they're not going to do anything about it, I find that really, really worrying. When we look at some of the other things that's gone on in care homes and various other scenarios in the Western world about dealing with them. And maybe when we're talking about cultural changes and those cultural changes that need to be made and those cultural changes that maybe don't need to be made or that are happening at a pace that's faster than some people would like, I would hope that most people would look at this and think, yeah, this is something that I don't know exactly what it is in terms of a cultural change that's needed, but some mechanisms of dealing with things like this. Because for people to be suppressing what they know, even when they know that there are other people that have had similar experiences in an environment that is as progressive as Hollywood, then I think that you've got a problem. Okay, well, thanks for listening and bye for now. Was that okay?